And we will begin with I'm calling the meeting to order. We'll begin with the roll call.
I think it'll be me doing that. Karen Kahn.
Here.
Kirk Martin. Craig Akuri.
Here.
Carl Hopkins.
Here.
Dolores Johnson.
Here.
Bruce Miller. Jim Wilson. Okay. That's it.
And are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes that I have. Thanks.
Okay. The next is the public comment section, during which any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled before them that same day. The total amount of time for public comment will be 15 minutes, and no individual speaker may speak more than 2 minutes. Do we have any speaker slips?
I have not received any, no.
Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak? All right, we will move on to the consent calendar. Do I hear a motion regarding the consent calendar?
I move we approve the consent calendar.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that the consent calendar be approved as written. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, the consent calendar is approved as printed, which now brings us to the notices that on Friday, April 14th, 2017, at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted the agenda on the bulletin board at Airport Administration. Our next item is liaison reports, and I do not see either of our liaison representatives. Okay. We will then move on to administrative reports. And the first item is the Santa Barbara Airport Economic Impact Study. And I'm understanding that we have Dr. Peter Rupert here to give the presentation.
I don't see Dr. Peter Rupert. We have Miguel. Okay.
Okay. Should we move that
Could we
down until we...
Would that be
Sure.
Fine, and we'll go to the next item?
Okay. We will skip item 12 pending Dr. Rupert's arrival. And we can move to item 13, the 6210 to 6240 Hollister Avenue development.
Do you have the... Okay. We have Representatives Trish Allen and Robert Plant to give Airport Commission an overview of the size of the project, its location, and to be able to answer any questions that you might have. You'll recall that we did a lease agreement with D&G Lynn. It's probably been 2 years, July 1st, I think. So the plan's been in process for that long. And so I thought it would be good for a reminder for Airport Commission to see this project. So I'll turn it over to Trish.
Thank you, Ms. Johns. I actually did bring a reduced packet of the plans. If the commissioners would like to follow along with their own packet, may I approach approach the bench?
Yeah.
So we have the Aside from the cover sheet, we have the project plans up on your screen, and I'm not sure if that's very visible, if you can adjust the lighting. And as Ms. Johns mentioned, we are in the development review process with the City of Santa Barbara. We have presented the project design to the Architectural Board of Review last August. We received the positive comments, sort of my summary, to continue processing, and we have gone through one 30-day review of our formal application. We are responding to that letter, and I expect to file hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the project architect, Robert Plant, and he'll walk you through the design, and I'll stay up in case there's questions.
Okay. This first image is the site plan.
This is
Oh, I can flick it there. Okay.
I think so.
First image is a site plan. We've got on the left the new proposed Chrysler dealership. On the right, we have a proposed Infiniti, and we've been working on negotiations with Volvo. So we would have 3 automotive franchises at this site. Oh, that's just, how do you flip it?
Excuse me, I have a question. If you can, that landscape area on the back, what are the dimension, rough dimensions of that?
That's a good question.
Commissioner Hopkins, are you talking about the big green space?
The big green spot, yes.
That's the runway protection zone.
Okay,
And so I don't have exact dimensions on it, but that will be clear, kept clear in accordance with FAA regulations.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Forgot to mention that Jeff's
Okay.
here too. So I
Um,
think that advances the slide.
That advances it? Okay.
Just give it a second.
Okay, here's the actual landscape plan for the project. We have trees away from the airport approach path. There's just low shrubberies, which we're kind of cleaning up and massaging that area where the old Chrysler store used to be. All the new facilities are off to the right in this plan. Our landscape architect is here if there's any questions with regards to the landscape palette. We're in the process of finishing up preparing the plans. This is one of the architectural plans showing the first floor service bays to the up of this image, the showroom to the bottom, and the parts department is in the center. This is the second floor mezzanine in the Chrysler store. Again, we've got it worked out. We're right at the process of starting all of our engineering for electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. We're waiting for a formal approval from planning, and then we can start that final phase of the working drawing package. These are some of the images that we've been sending to Chrysler, similar images to Infinity, where they have to approve all the materials in the building. In all of these designs, the different manufacturers have specific palettes of materials that they request that go into their new stores. And all those processes have been approved. Reflected ceiling plans on how all the lighting's going to work. Here's the flat elevations of the building. At the end of the presentation, I have some 3-dimensional images that I'll show you, but we've got all the elevations approved with the manufacturer and almost approved with the city of Santa Barbara. We're down to the last couple phases. Here's the images of the Infinity store. Here's some of the 3D models, so it's a little easier to read the ins and outs of the building. The models are not exactly correct. This was an earlier design. We had a few changes with the planning department, but they're pretty good images of where we are. This is a straight-on view. The service drives are right in the middle of the store. Chrysler on the left, Infinity and Volvo on the right. Here's down the street going west on Hollister. This would be an aerial of the stores. That's the last image.
Is the height of the building any larger than the previous dealership there?
I've never seen heights of the original building.
What is the height of this one?
It's the overall height. It'd be the portal is the tallest element.
I saw it on here, but it was too fine to
25.
read.
Yeah, we're 25 feet.
Can't read that either.
Is it right?
30 feet to 30 feet to
Right
here.
here,
Okay.
here it is.
Oh,
I just
35?
can't read it.
35 feet.
That's the architectural element.
Okay, 35?
Yeah, and that's basically just the front portal coming in. I would guess the old store was a 1-story Chrysler store. They're typically running about 20 to 25 feet.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question on the landscape area. You mentioned you have a landscape architect.
Right here.
So just some rough math, that looks like it's about 100,000 square feet. I kind of looked at the parking spots and multiplied it out, but regardless of what it is that just green area? Is it meandering paths?
The FAA clear zone,
Yeah.
that's about 200 by 300 feet. And that's no trees, but the engineer's got a bioswale that takes the storm water off the big paved areas, and it routes it through landscape troughs and swales to get the particulars out of it. And so the airport has let us do some shrub matter and some bioswaling on that FAA open space. But other than that, there's no planting over there. It'll just be weed whipped down.
In terms of pedestrian, I mean, is there, good
No, actually, there's a chain link fence between the leased portion of the property and then the FAA side, so it's,
completely
yeah,
blocked up?
with vines on the fence.
And that's just out of deference to the fact that it's limiting the approach for the runways, or?
It's required to be kept clear of any activity, no storage of vehicles, no roadways through. And so it will be fenced off and kept clear. Mhm.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Is the fence frangible?
That's us. The runway protection zone is the airport's responsibility.
Hazel, do you know if the fence is frangible? It'll fall down and not bite an airplane, kind of like the approach lights are?
I don't believe so, no. I'm not sure that it's required at that location.
And any other questions for our guests? Great.
I would just comment that I think it looks very nice and would look forward to seeing its completion.
What was the general timeframe? So what's the general timeframe, hoped for timeframe for completion?
As far as opening the doors,
When can we go by Carter?
I always just look towards my planning commission approval, which I am hopeful is sometime this summer. In terms of building permit,
Once we get planning approval, it would be about 11 months to finish the architectural drawings and to build the building.
And you said you've been to planning commission once already?
not to the planning commission yet. We've been to the
ABR.
architectural board
Okay.
a couple of times.
Thank you.
Do we need more comments for the planning commission? Okay, I'm looking to your staff for that.
Okay,
Okay,
any
thank
further
you.
questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
And let's see, do we have Dr. Rupert back yet with us? Or we will go on to the item 14, the proposed operating budget for fiscal years 2018 and 19. Wait,
I think they just announced.
Thank you, Microsoft. I feel like there should be some elevator music. Dun, 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 dun.
Tom Bullers, our administrative analyst, will present the budget for the next 2 years. Tom?
Good evening, Airport Commissioners. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2019 operating budgets. Our fiscal year runs July 1, so our fiscal year 2018 would begin July 1, 2017 and run to June 30, 2018. So our presentation tonight will give you a quick department overview, talk about our budget assumptions, the FY18 budget, and some key performance objectives that we have coming up next year. So our mission statement is the Tri-Counties region's airport of choice. Santa Barbara Airport will be self-sustaining, exceed expectations for safety and quality service, and meet the air transportation and economic development needs of its customers and partners. The airport is an enterprise fund that is regulated by the FAA and TSA. Those organizations regulated us for aircraft rescue and firefighting, maintenance and repair, security. And an important note about an enterprise fund as well is we are financially self-supporting. We don't use any general fund revenues, and we generate our revenues from tenant rents and user fees. We have a variety of programs at the airport, kind of running the gamut. Airport police, maintenance, marketing, property management, planning, capital planning. For our department staffing, this is our full-time employees. The current fiscal year 2017, we have 55.75 employees, and for next year we're proposing to go to 61 employees. And you can see those are concentrated in the maintenance, security, and certain ops groups. We'll talk a little bit more about those specific positions later in the presentation. Some of our budget assumptions. We assumed relative stability in the GA and commercial industrial sectors. There's a couple of notable exceptions for that. One is the 495 Fairview lease, which returns to the hangar, or which returns to the airport in May of 2018, and gives us a big boost in revenues in fiscal year 2019. And then the 6100 Hollister development is our light industrial development across the street. We anticipate that coming online January of 2019. We also based our budget assumptions on the airline rates and charges that was presented to you last month. We're also proposing an increase to the daily maximum rate over at the terminal long-term parking lot from $12 to $13. So slightly more than 8% increase. That hasn't been increased since fiscal year 2012, so that'll be about 6 years. So that's kind of spreads that a roughly 1% increase per year out. And it's also comparable to some of the other airports in California. Air service changes. This is one of the big stories for the airport, and I'm just going to go to the slide of our enplanements because I think this is really the big driver of our budget for the next few years. The airport had a big high here in this fiscal year 2005, 2008, and then a steady decline from there until fiscal year 2016. But as you can see, we're projecting some really significant increases here. FY17, we're projecting about a 10% increase over 2016. FY18 is about a 13.5% increase. And FY 2019 is about a 3% increase over the prior year to that. And the real story here is aircraft upgauging. We've seen a lot of our 50-seat aircraft go to 76-seat aircraft, and we've also been notified that in June and July, some of our 50 or 70-seat, 6-seat aircraft are going to go to mainline A319s or A320s or 737-800, 737-900. So that represents a really big jump in seats for the airport. And passengers are an important revenue driver for the airport because it feeds into parking revenues and rental car revenues, concessions, the restaurant, etc. So specifically for FY 2017, this is where we project to end the year. This year, this is about 2% over budget. A couple of the drivers of that are commercial industrial properties. We had some limited vacancies over there. We've seen some really strong landing and fuel flowage fees in the GA community, and passengers will finish a little higher than we had initially budgeted, so that feeds into these terminal and commercial aviation revenues. So for FY18, this is sort of the breakdown of our proposed budget. Just to kind of describe what each of these are. Terminal revenues are parking, rental car, concessions. Commercial aviation is our commercial airline revenues, so landing fees, terminal rentals, fuel flowage fees. Non-commercial aviation is the GA community and our FBOs. And then the commercial industrial is our properties that we rent on the north side of the airport. The percentages here, a few years ago, they were weighted a little more towards the commercial industrial. They've shifted a bit towards terminal and commercial aviation. One of the things we're excited about with the 495 Fairview lease coming back online is this non-commercial aviation number is going to get a nice boost, so it kind of diversifies our revenue base more for the future. Our FY17 projected expenditures, we anticipate these to be about 3% below budget, and the real big driver here is salaries and benefits. We anticipate about $550,000 in savings. We've roughly had $500,000 to $600,000 in savings the last few fiscal years. We just had some vacancies in the department that hopefully we'll be filling pretty soon. Some fiscal year expenditure enhancements that we've requested. We're asking for some additional money for legal services. We have a lot of development going on in the airport. We anticipate that there might be some legal obstacles associated with that, so we're trying to be prepared for that. Our ground transportation program, this is currently being revised. We'll start implementing it next fiscal year. About $128,000 to staff it. We'll spend a little over $80,000 to install some monitoring equipment over at the terminal. And the ground transportation program is really to encompass all of the ground transportation users over the terminal. So not just the taxis, but the Lyfts and Ubers of the world. I think that's the biggest example that everybody knows. The long-term Lot 2 shuttle, with some big boosts in our passenger numbers, we anticipate that we might need to start using the shuttle again. This is a much more limited shuttle service than it was in the past. This would be one shuttle for limited periods of the year where we were overflowing over at the long-term lot at the terminal. We would anticipate shuttling terminal employees over to long-term Lot 2 using the shuttle. They're currently parked over at the long-term terminal lot. And then we've also proposed those changes that I showed on the first slide up to the 61 full-time positions. The net cost of those changes is about $292,000. So one of them is the first one there, 0.75 full-time admin specialist to a full-time admin specialist. This is in our badging office. We've continued to have more badging office requirements, and it takes more time to staff it, and this is really to staff it appropriately. As you know, Rebecca retired very recently, so we're actually proposing to raise the level of her position to provide some supervisor level duties of some admin staff in the business and properties group. And also, we have some big developments going on, so we want to be able to try to fill those developments up. The airport maintenance coordinator is in the maintenance division. Again, we have some big properties coming online, so we anticipate having some additional maintenance needs. The senior airport operations specialist, this is really to fully staff our certain ops division. And the 3 new regular airport security aides, these are currently hourly positions that work at the curbside at the terminal, telling people to move when they need to move, doing some employee screening duties. We really don't anticipate that those are going to change in the near future. Those are requirements that we have to implement as an airport, and it reduces some staff turnover. On the expenditure side, you can see some of those items feeding in. Our special projects has gone up a little bit. We are we have a lot of staff. We're a customer service organization on a basic level. So that is one of our biggest expenditures. Supplies and services over here includes aircraft rescue and firefighting and engineering services. That's about 11 full-time staff and other departments that we pay for services here at the airport. Allocated costs are costs that we pay to the city for city attorney, finance, accounting, HR, IT, costs that all departments chip in for. And I'll just highlight one of our other big expenditures, the bond debt. That's to pay for the new terminal, about $3.1 million total. We split the costs between the operating fund and our PFC fund. We have a few big capital projects coming up next year. Our AIP grant match will be for the runway 725 rehab project. That'll be a big project. The runway needs some serious work. Bids are closing for that tomorrow. Lessee building maintenance, street maintenance, AOA paving, utility infrastructure. These are all basic capital projects that we try to fund on an ongoing basis so that we can maintain the infrastructure here at the airport. The airport radio repeater. Some of the handheld radios here at the airport don't function correctly with downtown emergency responders, and this is to remedy that issue. The vehicle ID system, that's related to the implementation of the ground transportation program. This is year 7 of 7 for our Gleta Slough Tidal Restoration Monitoring Project. So we should see this as our last year that we're going to be budgeting for that. And then finally, we are looking to replace our property management system. It's outdated and pretty obsolete, with an upgraded property management and accounts receivable system. So our cash flow projections with some of those big projects, I just want to highlight from left to right some of the items that are kind of standouts here on this chart. You can see FY16, 17, 18, and 19. In other, for FY17 projected, the airport operating fund had spent some money in advance designing the 6100 Hollister development. This was to reimburse the operating fund for those expenditures after the direct relief property was sold. Commercial industrial revenues typically don't go down, so I'm just highlighting that because we're anticipating it to go down a little bit next year. Building 114 across the street is currently occupied by Teledyne, will be vacant, so we had planned for a 6-month vacancy. The terminal program, we anticipate getting a little extra revenue from the ground transportation program. That's about $180,000 in per trip fees, a $3 per trip fee. Increased passengers feed into parking and rental cars, and the upgauge planes feed into increased landing fees and fuel flowage fees. And then in FY19, when you look at the bottom line, you see quite a big jump from the 18.3 to the 20.1. 6100 Hollister, when the development's completed, we plan to split this with our development fund to fund future development. But the big bump is when the 495 Fairview lease comes back to the airport. On the expenditure side, we have had salary savings for the past few years. We anticipate that to continue. We have proposed some increased staffing for FY18 and going forward. So those numbers, I'm going to point out right now, they're a little different here. These are based on actuals, and these are based on budget. We budget for full staffing, and we, again, are usually around 6 to 8 to 10% under budget when the year actually ends. Supplies and services, those are some of those enhancement requests that we had mentioned about legal services, some increased costs for ARF and engineering, and also the cost of the ground transportation staff. our long-term Lot 2 shuttle. We discontinued that a few years ago, but with some increased passengers, we might have to resume it. And I'll just point out the bottom line here. So the last few years, or in 16, we made about $400,000. We anticipate making $500,000 this year. We're budgeting a little bit of about a $600,000 deficit next year. A lot of that's tied up in our capital project. We have a pretty ambitious capital program, but based on our historical trends in salaries and benefit savings, we think we'll probably be able to make that up throughout the year, especially if passenger numbers go up more than we anticipate. We actually budgeted a fairly conservative passenger increase. And then with some of those revenue enhancements in FY19, a $500,000 budget surplus. So some of our key performance objectives in the admin group, initiate that transition for May of 2018 for the 495 Fairview hangar, establish some procedures for our fixed base operator RFP. In the business and property group, we're looking to go out to bid for a new parking management contract that runs up at the end of August, and also install some new revenue control equipment over at actually at all of our parking lots. Replacing our outdated property management system, putting together a marketing plan for our light industrial development to try and get some tenants in advance of actually building those locations, and filling the vacancy over at Building 114. In our marketing group, doing some surveys of our traveler groups to get a better idea of where we should be advertising, how we should be advertising. Refocusing our budget to promoting nonstop destinations direct from Santa Barbara, and trying to engage a champion that can really talk about SBA's value to the region. And I think when UCSB does their report, they'll show some significant value. Facilities maintenance group, they're going to do some repairs to the wastewater collection system based on some inspections they did last year. Re-roof and paint Building 305. Bid out their custodial contract again for terminal custodial supplies. Maintain a diversion rate for recyclables at or above 45%. Provide some additional charging stations for passenger electronic devices at the terminal, and then also provide some emergency backup lighting for the restrooms in the terminal lobby. Our AOA maintenance group, looking at signage and really trying to repair deteriorated signs and inventory for planning on doing that going forward, and then repainting the taxiway center lines. Our security group, developing an internal notice of violation procedure for driving violations in the AOA. Certain ops, installing a daily activity logging and reporting system. That would be web-based, so everybody can kind of see what's going on in real time. And then our facilities planning and development group, completing construction of the runway 725 rehab, 50% construction of the 6100 Hollister development, getting some significant design work done for the taxiway hotel extension project, completing construction of the L3 building remodel, adopting the master plan, and facilitating some consultations between federal agencies on for some Goleta Slough mouth management permits. So tonight we're looking for the Airport Commission to recommend the Council approval of the Airport Department's fiscal year 2018 and 2019 operating budgets. We met with the Budget Subcommittee earlier today, and they recommended approval. And I'll take any questions if you have them.
Any questions?
I do.
Greg?
I won't ask you to go back, but the shuttle that we're talking about where the old drive-in used to be, that was the thing that we were spending north of $1 million a year for years ago, a few years ago. And that was for passengers back and forth. And so this, that expenditure here, if needed, or likely needed based on the passenger increase, is to shuttle employees back and forth. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, that's what we would plan on doing first, is shuttling employees.
And then I also remember a spirited conversation a year ago about ARF that we ultimately didn't prevail on what we wanted to do, which was, I think the bottom line is we wanted to cut it back to not 24/7 or the number of people, but whatever it was, we had a spirited conversation which we wound up not reducing that. The airlines that are upgauging airplanes to 737s and Airbus equivalents, was there, the ARF category we're in, was there any preliminary, had we done that, would that have, do you think that would have affected those folks bringing in larger airplanes? Which I guess isn't really a budget question, but kind of is.
Yeah, no, we have the equipment to handle those aircraft coming in, and it wouldn't change our overall index, so the overall requirements wouldn't
Wouldn't
change.
still be the same. That's what I thought. Okay. And then on the staffing, and we did talk about this at the committee meeting just before the commission meeting, but when was the last time we were fully staffed? Does anybody remember?
Was it 2011 possibly?
So
For a
quite
couple
some time
months?
ago, and again, we talked about this in the committee meeting. I think it's worth just repeating. And what's the primary reason for being perennially understaffed?
Generally, it's the price of housing in Santa Barbara.
All right, so just getting people to take the job for the salary that can't afford to live here.
Exactly.
Alrighty, and then building 305 that we're going to re-roof. What building is that?
It's over by the
I
tower.
thought it was
Do you-
305.
Yeah.
The building is down on Arnold Place, just west of the tower.
Is that where the flight schools are right now, or no?
It's Dr. Charay, isn't it?
Yeah, Dynaston.
Dynaston.
Oh, okay.
They've been
okay.
an airport tenant
For
35 years or something like that.
they have buckets underneath probably. And then last question, which probably isn't directly related to budget, but the developing an internal notice of violation for AOA violations. So what do we do now? I mean, what are we replacing, or what do we do now that we're going to change?
If we've got somebody driving not properly on the OA, we've typically spoken with them or their manager, and we're going to formalize the process so that if we ended up speaking to someone more than once, we've got some backup. And it's never been a huge issue, but with a lot of projects and more people driving on the OA, it's time.
Okay, no, thanks. That's all I have.
Any other questions?
No questions, but I'd just like to thank Tom for an excellent report. Very well done, very clear. I particularly liked your little boxes there pointing out the differences in the numbers and what caused those differences. Even though I had just spent an hour going over this in the subcommittee meeting, this was even more enlightening, so thank you.
I have just a couple of questions. Regarding the bonds on the terminal and the T-hanger bonds, what's the time remaining on particularly the T-hangers, which are probably much more likely to be expiring before the terminal is?
The T-hanger payment is to the state of California. It was a 17-year loan that we received, and we just this month paid the 10th payment.
Okay.
So we have 7 more years on the T-hangers. The terminal was a 30-year bond, and we had making payments, I want to 2000.
I think 2009, the
that's
terminal
what I
debt
think.
should be retired in 2039.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No, they got covered with all your conversations, so thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for a very complete presentation. Do we have Dr. Rupert yet, or shall we move on to our lease amendment?
I sent him a message, but I didn't hear back. I heard back from him a little over an hour ago, said he'd be here, but
Okay, well, we're still not out of time, so why don't we move on to item 15, the lease amendment with first-class concessions.
Okay, Deanna will make the presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. I am going to give a little bit of a presentation about a proposal to extend the lease and concession agreement that we have with our airport food and beverage concessionaire, First Class Concessions, and give you a little bit of background to that as well. So First Class Concessions is an ACDBE, in other words, it's a minority-owned concessionaire company, small business, based in San Diego. They specialize essentially in small to mid-size airports around the country. They competed for the business in the new terminal back in 2010. So there was an RFP that went out that they were the successful proposer for. Today they operate 3 locations in the terminal. They have 1 full-service dining restaurant, post-security. Oh yes, lights. Yes, we go, lights. I have too much equipment to operate today. 3 locations, the full-service dining, and then they have, they started with 2 branded coffee locations, Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf locations. They occupy about 1,900 square feet in the terminal. Let's see here. And next, here we go. So the thing that changed really since the original inception of their agreement in 2010 is that in 2011-12, the airport really discovered that pre-security there was a lack of a broader food offering than just coffee, and in particular a light wine and beer offering. And that was not something that could be offered within the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf concept. So the airport asked the concessionaire if they would reconcept that space and make it into a cafe, essentially, that offered a broader array of services. That tenant had already invested about $100,000 into that location initially, and the airport request led to them investing another $60,000 into that location to convert it. They also had to end their franchise agreement with Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf to change over that location. Now, the benefit of that for them and for the airport is that it increased sales. It met a demand that was there, and also offering beer and wine tends to increase sales. It also obviously increased the satisfaction of our passengers, which is what we're all out for. The tenant came to us then and asked us for additional term beyond their 10-year agreement in order to amortize that additional investment. So let's see, make sure that I didn't miss a slide here. Oh, good, okay. So what we did is we did a pro forma analysis of that concessionaire. Essentially, the concessionaire agrees to open up their books to us to show us what their finances look like. So we examined their sales history. There's some industry standard metrics for costs of goods sold, labor, their amortization on their investment, and then profit. And so what we could see there in that analysis is that they were doing a healthy bit of business. Their profit margin was not quite reaching up to what one would expect normally out of an airport concession. But it's important to point out that the airport is not responsible for providing any tenant with a profit, but that was just simply something that we could observe. And we could also observe the rate in which they were amortizing that investment. So let's see here, next slide. Oh, goodness, 4 or 5. It's not wanting to go. Do we have the next slide here? Let's do this one. Will that work? No. Next. Let's try that. Next. Okay. Finally, we get a transition here. So after we did that analysis, we sat down and had a negotiation with that tenant. And as part of that analysis, we determined that some extension of that lease term was financially justified because of that investment. So, but probably in the neighborhood of maybe 3 to 4 years. So we sat down and discussed this with the tenant and arrived at a solution that was a win-win for all of us. And that is that we would extend or propose extending their lease to 5 years, so it would extend through August of 2016. And in exchange, they would agree in 2018 to reconcept the full-service restaurant in the post-security area. It is a good restaurant, but as it is with airport concessions, refreshing concepts is good, particularly if they've been in place for a while. And usually when you do that, you will see a very healthy uptick in sales because passengers, especially in an origination and destination airport that pass the same concept for a number of years, when they see something new, it leads to greater expenditures. And I think this will also be a benefit to us as we see increased employments and real opportunity there. So we negotiated then with them that they would make some additional investment beyond what they have already done in converting the downstairs coffee shop and reconcept that upstairs restaurant. So essentially what we are proposing is an extension under the same terms and conditions, rent and everything else, simply getting a little bit more investment out of them to reconcept this and extending the lease. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point if you like. Had a little bit of trouble with that technology there. And
I'd like to just comment that I have used them very often, and the food is good and the customer service is excellent.
yes, we've generally been very happy with them.
Any questions? Any questions or comments? And do we have a proposal here?
Yes, a recommendation that Airport Commission recommend the approval of the lease extension with first-class concessions.
Okay, it has been recommended that the commission approve the lease extension. All in any discussion?
Okay, I was going to say I move that we approve.
Second.
Okay.
That's good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. And I'm thinking that we forgot to do a vote on item 14 regarding the operating budget.
We did, yeah.
So I'd like to back up, if we may, and ask if we have anyone who'd like to make a motion regarding the acceptance of the proposed operating budget
I'll
for...
make a motion that we, just leave this thing on. I'll make a motion that we approve the operating budget for 17-18.
And I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it passes. Moving on to the director's report, and we'll leave Dr. Rupert till last, or would you recommend, would you like to make the presentation for him? Or would we want to move it to the next meeting?
Gail, would
Yeah.
you like to make
I can do the presentation, but if there's anything else, maybe we'll just give time to see if it shows up.
Can't hear him.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay, he, for those who couldn't hear, he mentioned that he could do the presentation, but maybe we could just move it to the end of the meeting. So with that, why don't we move on to the director's
The
report?
director's report, yes. I just have a couple of items to bring to your attention, and the very first one, of course, is our passenger count. You've heard this evening more and more stories about how well we're doing with that. And for the month of March, over the same period last year, we're up 19.3%, which is incredible. The year-to-date numbers are 10.3%. So I think the efforts that we have made working with the airlines and presenting them with documentation that we do have a market in the Santa Barbara regional area, and all they have to do is give us the airplanes. It's coming forward now. The Dallas flight that started on April 4th, that plane has 130 seats, and on the first day they had 125 people on the plane.
Great.
So far it's going out in the upper 90s percent occupied. So we're very, very pleased with that. And of course it's putting a little pressure on Deanna to come up with more marketing efforts to get our citizens in our community to fly out of Santa Barbara first and check our rates. but I think they are, and it is so convenient to catch those flights. The new aircraft that are coming this summer in June and July and August will all be mainline equipment. The schedule itself, we're not adding flights. It's replacing the equipment for the existing number of frequencies. So that's good for all. And the first flight out going to San Francisco will be mainline. The last one coming back to Santa Barbara will be mainline. Same thing for Denver, and same thing for Seattle. So we're very, very pleased with the upgauging that the airlines are doing. The master plan, I have to say that Andrew had a meeting with the environmental group that he's been working with on a section of our environmental document on April 13th, and they walked out in the airfield to take a look at our mitigation sites, and I think we've answered the majority of their questions and concerns, and so that document should be coming to you. I'm not going to give you a date, coming to you soon, and then we'll proceed to Planning Commission and then to City Council for adoption. And I hope to have that completed by the end of the summer of this year, not next year. The other project, as Tom mentioned earlier, Runway 725 Overlay Project, it is a big project for the airport. We anticipate having, it's about $5 million. Bids are due tomorrow, so we'll see. The original plan was adjusted somewhat because the engineer's estimate came out to $7 million, and we only have 5, so they adjusted the bid package to, excuse me, to accommodate the amount of work that they could do with the money that we have. The other item, excuse me, our commercial industrial, light industrial development, there was the appeal hearing on April 11th at City Council, and after discussion, Council denied the appeal and is having the project go forward based on the Planning Commission resolution of conditions, which we will follow. And our next step with that is going to ABR for final approval of the drawings and the design, and that's on the 24th. It's at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's when we're scheduled, or 4:50, I think. So once we have that, then we'll finalize our plans, hopefully get our building permit, and then go out to bid this summer. So that project is rolling forward. The solar project has we're still negotiating some of the terms of the power purchase agreement. We hope to have that worked out very soon. We thought we did, but we have a question on possessory interest tax, and so we're working through that, and we'll be bringing it back to City Council hopefully in the next month or so. That concludes my comments, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions?
I do. Thank you, Hazel.
Mm-hmm.
Does the increase that we're seeing, any idea how that compares to peer group airports, either regionally or size-wise, or?
I don't know exactly. I know that San Luis Obispo was fortunate to get service to Seattle, and I think that started here just recently. And of course, we're the busiest airport between LA and San Jose, so I'm not sure which other airports to look at, but so I really don't know the answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And then separate question, the EIR that you're hoping to come to a conclusion on, that's the final step in the master plan process. Is that correct? The final big major step.
Yes. Once the environmental document is finalized and accepted or approved by the Planning Commission, then the whole master plan with the EIR goes to City Council for adoption, and that concludes that process.
And the City Council has been involved in the master plan process. This isn't the first time they'll see the 600-page document.
They'll see a summary of that 600-page.
Right.
But no, they've had updates along the way. We haven't had an update in quite some time just because we've sort of been stalled on the EIR.
Thank you.
Carl, go ahead.
I would just like to make two comments for the public primarily. You see that we have a 10% increase year over year. That did not just happen. That happened because of a great deal of work on the airport staff, both in marketing to the people here in Santa Barbara, but more importantly, marketing to the airlines to get all of these both increased flights and the upgauging of the aircraft. The second thing I'd like to note about the what we're being referred to as the mainline, I guess, aircraft, particularly flying in and out of San Francisco. The larger aircraft are able to land in San Francisco in much worse weather than the smaller aircraft, and also to a certain extent here in Santa Barbara. But not only does this give us a lot more seats, but it also gives us a lot higher reliability of getting there without a flight canceled, both of which I think are extremely important. So, thanks to the staff.
Yes, thank you so much. Should we proceed with the economic impact report at this point?
Yes, I'll have Deanna do the introductions.
Okay.
Okay. Alrighty, just in preparation for Miguel's presentation. Late last year, we met first with the economics department at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and contracted with them to conduct an economic impact study. And of course, the interest that the airport has in doing so is to really fully understand the quantifiable impact that the airport has on the surrounding community and really the region, the Santa Barbara region, and looking at what that economic impact looks like: direct impact, indirect impact, induced impact, which Miguel will talk about in greater detail. And we also did, as part of the study, he'll talk about methodology, I believe, a little bit, but we also did quite a bit of survey work in the terminal of our passengers, and we're able to derive data from that. So without further ado, Miguel?
Thank you. Hello. My name is Miguel Delgado Heliceter. I'm a professor of economics at California State University, Channel Islands, but I've been working with the Forecast Project for about 5 or 6 years, doing this kind of studies regionally here. What I'll do is I'll discuss a little bit of the sort of methodology and the software that we use for this. We use a program called Implan. Then I'll go into our executive summary, the main findings that we had, and I'll talk a little bit about a survey that we conducted in order to get some of the data that we actually put into our study. So Implan is basically the industry standard for doing this kind of economic impacts in a region. It's what we call an input-output model, where the company has gone back and looked at industry linkages. And what I mean by this is when somebody spends $1 in, say, the oil industry, that dollar doesn't stop there, right? The oil industry locally goes out and they make some expenditures and so on. And so what they've done is they've estimated those linkages in all the different industries. And so we use their software to then analyze the impacts of any particular industry. And so what we do is we collect data, in this case from the airport and the tenants at the airport, about where they spend their money. And so what happens is we allocate those expenditures into different industries. The airport spends on food, they spend on transportation, they spend on a number of things. And so we distribute their expenses that way, and we estimate that impact into how that kind of trickles down through the economy. And so we estimate what are direct, indirect, and induced effects. The direct effect is essentially just the spending by the airport, the tenants, and in this case, people flying through Santa Barbara Airport, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The indirect effect is going to be when the airport goes out and they purchase something locally, that local company may go out and purchase things that they need to provide the service or the good that the airport is buying. That would be the indirect effect. And then the induced effect is the spending of all the employees, both of the ones that are directly impacted as well as the ones that are indirectly impacted. Their employees spend a fair amount of their money locally, and so that would be the induced effect that we estimate. And so the total impact is the sum of those three effects. Questions? I'm sorry, I'm used to teaching, and so we stop and ask questions a lot. So again, the total effect is the sum of the three, and we estimate what are called multipliers, which is just the ratio of the total effect to the direct effect. And so, how much did the dollar get multiplied through the local economy? And so something that we should point out is that as we request data on this, we are very careful about asking for what is local spending, because we understand that local companies may purchase supplies and other things from companies that are not local, meaning not in the Santa Barbara County. And so in our data collection effort, we ask for of your expenses, can you break them down into what's locally spent and what's not, so that we focus just on the local part. So here's our main findings, and I'll discuss primarily employment and output. So out of a direct effect of 103 million, we end up with a total effect of 205 million. So again, the 103 million would be spending by the airport, spending by the airport's tenants, and in this case, spending by visitors to the Santa Barbara County area that arrive through the airport. Not all visitors, just visitors that arrive through the airport. And so again, the indirect effect is how those purchases translate into further purchases by local companies. The induced effect is the spending of all the employees from those companies. On employment, the direct effect is 1,440 positions, and those further impact a number of additional positions to a total of 2,190 locally. So to break this down a little bit further, on the output impact, we estimated spending by the airport and the tenants at about 62 million, spending by the tourists that arrive through the airport at about 41 million locally. And again, the total effect is 205 million, which gives us a multiplier of 2. And what that means is that when a dollar is spent locally by the airport, by the tenants, or by a passenger arriving through the airport, that dollar gets essentially doubled in the local economy. We do the same for jobs. Jobs supported by the airport and its tenants are 1,440. The total job effect is 2,190, so the multiplier there is about 1.5. So for every job supported by the airport or the tenants, about half an additional job gets created locally. There are some tax impacts, and we had some issues with the conversion of the slides, so those should be dollar signs instead of stars. But so we estimate that the activities of the airport generate about 31 million in federal, state, and local taxes, 19 million federal, 12 million for state and local. So how we went about this? The airport provided us with a fair amount of data about their expenses. As I mentioned at the beginning, what we do is that we ask them, where did you spend your money in a particular year? Give us details about your expenditures. Don't just tell us, we spent $30 million. In what sectors did you spend that money? And we take the data and we break it into all these different sectors. I don't know if you're familiar with, for example, NAICS codes of industries, but it's essentially something like that, where we break out all those expenses into the different ones. And we did the same with tenants. What we did is that we reached out to every tenant of the airport. We didn't get every single one of them to provide data. We got about 55 to 60% response rate from them, where what we requested was essentially the same. Tell us where you spend your money, tell us how much you spent on your employees, and so on. And so from that data and data from the airport, we estimated that direct impact portion, or most of it. The last portion of it came from a survey that we did of passengers. We worked on this with the airport. And what we did is that we surveyed a bunch of passengers as they arrived and asked them, are you from here? Are you not from here? And so we figured out the share of those that are essentially visitors to the area. And from what they told us about where they stayed, how much they spent on lodging, how much they spent on food, how much they spent on entertainment, we made some estimates of the total spending that they would do here in Santa Barbara. What we find, I'm just going to point a couple of the findings. I mean, the survey is quite extensive and we have a lot more data, but we try to keep this somewhat brief. What we find is that for the most part, we serve a highly educated population. The blue lines are what we call residents, people that live in Santa Barbara County. The red line are non-residents, basically people that said that they're not from the county. For both of them, we see that the distributions are fairly similar, with a large number of people holding either graduate degrees or bachelor's degrees. Not only are they highly educated, they are relatively high income. Our residents, there's a larger share of them that are high income, but our non-residents that are visiting, there's a fair amount of them that are high income as well. And we think this is a good thing. We think this is a good thing because people with higher incomes mean they have more disposable income to spend in the area. And so they're tourists that are more likely to come and spend a fair amount here locally. And so that's a good thing for us. We estimated that 60% of them stayed in hotels, motels, or vacation rentals. That means they actually paid for their stay. And so based on that, we estimated an average spending by each visitor to the county at roughly $570. And that drives part of that impact on the direct impact that we discussed at the beginning. Questions?
So you're a professor. I just wanted to make sure there's no test.
There is no test.
Terrific. Economics wasn't a subject that was great for me, so that's good. The airports across the country are always under, especially smaller airports, are under pressure. Santa Monica is, been under threat of closure for decades, and it looks like that's going to be successful. And so you see these reports in the news of the economic impact of the airport. Have you ever been involved, or do you know if the university has been involved in doing an economic impact study for any other airports, or is this the first time you've done this type of thing?
This is the first time for me, and it's the first time that I know that we've done this for an airport. We've mostly done work that is regional, and I'm not aware that we've done anything for the airport up in Santa Maria or San Luis Obispo, so
Right.
I'm guessing this is the first time that we have done this.
And kind of as a follow-up to that, not that I'm suggesting this, but let's say this was just a big shopping mall or a residential development. The kinds of translations of dollars to the direct, indirect, and induced, if you were to compare something of this size, and I don't know if that size is dollars or square feet or square miles or whatever, but are those factor numbers of every dollar spent basically creates two. Is that a particularly low number for that kind of economic analysis, or is it a very high number, or?
It's actually a fairly typical number. We tend to find things in the 1.5 to 2% range in studies that we've done. We've done work for the oil industry, we've done work for the city college, and 2% doesn't seem low.
You say 2%, you mean the 200?
I mean,
okay.
A multiplier of 2 doesn't
Right,
seem
right.
low. In looking a little bit at some tourism research that has been done around here, we've found multipliers closer to 1.5 in some other areas. So 2 is actually pretty high. What drives this, of course, is we break out the data into a lot of detail, and some industries have stronger linkages and some have weaker, meaning that
Right.
a dollar spent in a particular industry may multiply farther than if you spent it somewhere else.
Right.
And I do not want to sort of venture into guessing if we were looking at a mall instead of the airport, what would that would have been, but
those factors are not, they're kind of in a range that is consistent with.
They are, and so as I said, we looked back at some things that have been done for the state, as well as for other regions, not for airports, but for tourism in general. And so we are actually a little bit higher than that, which again, if we consider that we probably tend to have a little bit of a higher end visitor,
Right.
That's not unusual.
And you mentioned that you kind of summarized and you collected a lot of data and you picked out some of the pieces. Do you have a more comprehensive version of this that you can distribute that gives us all of the details that you didn't do here?
Commissioner, there's actually a stack of executive summaries at the door for anyone who's interested, and there is a larger report if anybody's interested in seeing it.
Okay, yeah, I would certainly like to see that. And then what caused us, this is the first time we've done this. What caused us to do this?
Well, actually, it's not our first time doing it. We
Okay.
have, the last economic impact study that we conducted was right before 9/11. So, with all the changes in the world, it just seemed like it was another opportunity to do that. And we also, in talking with airlines, we wanted to make sure that we had good data on passengers and spending, and also just to talk about the airport and the region and the economic impact of the airport. So that sort of led us to do that as well.
How much did it cost?
Fairly inexpensive. I believe it was less than $30,000.
Bunch of starving students, graduate students.
That would be correct.
So I mean, I think that's awesome that we did that, and I would just kind of say that if, you know, we ought to kind of adopt it on a regular basis every 5 years or something, where
Update it.
we do that, just to measure what's happening. Thank you.
Well, hopefully we can use that in our advertising to point out that we're not just a pretty face.
That was my next question. Are we going to use it so that general public sees some of these figures?
Commissioner, we actually are intending to issue a news release about this to let people know. So hopefully
Especially the
we'll-
hotels, I would think that they would be thrilled.
Absolutely, absolutely. We share that with our partners Visit Santa Barbara and our chambers of commerce as well. And as Hazel pointed out with the air carriers, they're very interested to see those kinds of results.
It's a great report. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
if I may, on the survey, we ask about things that would attract more tourism, both, more of our residents flying out of here, more of our visitors to actually keep coming back and so on. And so the report has a fair amount of information on that too that I think would be valuable.
And so, yeah, 'cause that's where I was going. So Deanna, the detail report that has, for instance, every one of the questions you asked passengers and a tally of the results, that's something that you can make available?
Yes, absolutely. And
Awesome.
we also could post it to our website, would be an appropriate thing for us to do.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Did you find there was anything that passengers really wanted, or was that not part of the survey that they were hoping would come to pass?
I think there were certain routes that they would hope would be more convenient, or more direct flights to certain areas.
Yeah.
I think New
Las
York
Vegas.
was
Yeah,
Las
that's
Vegas,
right.
New York were a couple of big ones where they said it'd be great to be able to just
Yeah.
get on here and get off in New York without having to change planes and so on.
Dream on. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your good report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Very useful.
Well, I think we are adjourned if there's no further questions or comments.
I think we are adjourned.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you.